Well, many of the towns in upstate New York have been faced with intrusions from industrial wind developers. This goes back at least 15 years. Most of the developers have been unsuccessful in putting up their projects because of significant public opposition. And back in the day, we used to find the public opposition was based upon concerns with property values and also impact on the environment, view sheds, and things like that. Since then, our understanding of the real environmental impacts of industrial wind turbines has changed tremendously. And it's real, while we still have the issues with regard to things like a shadow flicker, the view shed impact, shift in taxes as the property values decline. One friend of ours, he and his wife and daughter live in a beautiful retirement home in the next town over, and the value of their property when they built it about 10 years ago was $1.1 million. It's now worth $200,000 because a house that you cannot sleep in is not worth very much on the market. And his wife and daughter are much more affected by the infrasound from the turbines, and they try to spend as much time as they can away from the house. They probably sleep away from the house 200 nights a year. However, since then, we're really learning that the issue that's most important to us as a community is the impact of industrial wind turbines on the health and safety of the population. And a number of years ago, a study was done by the province of Ontario, the health department there. And they ended up finding that they did a literature study worldwide, and they coined the term wind turbine syndrome. And wind turbine syndrome is a set of 10 symptoms that are caused by the low frequency noise from the turbines. The low frequency noise is low frequency, which means you don't hear it. But it's a very powerful, long wavelength sound, and people describe it as, a friend of mine, he says, when I go to bed at night, I can feel my internal organs pulsing. They actually vibrate. Now, the impact of all the different types of wind turbine syndrome, which include ringing in the ears, ear pressure, dizziness, vertigo, nausea, visual blurring, tachycardia, a racing heartbeat, irritability, problems with concentration and memory, panic episodes, both awake and sleeping, and sensations of internal pulsing or quivering. The general impact of these types of symptoms is sleep deprivation. It's very difficult when you have ringing in the ears or you become suddenly irritable. It's very difficult to sleep. So many people find they only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep at night. And there was just a study, which I believe came out of the Far East a couple of weeks ago, that said that if you get less than 6 hours of sleep each night, you are at risk for cardiac problems. Now, 2 friends of ours who were very, very healthy both came down with cardiac problems in the town of Cohocton. One died, the other recovered. So let me talk a little bit more about this infrasound, these pulses which come from the turbines, and they come only when the turbines are operating. And the sound is generated when a blade passes across the tower. The blade, of course, is going 180 to 200 miles an hour, and it's pushing large amounts of air that hit the tower, bounce back, and create this infrasound. This penetrates buildings, it penetrates everything. You cannot keep the infrasound out of your house. Think about the impact of it on a healthy male or healthy female, middle-aged. They could be one of those lucky people that in fact is not irritated significantly by the infrasound. But we find very, very frequently that the elderly are very much at risk and young people are very much at risk. We also found both in humans and with a lot of different domesticated animals links between infrasound and spontaneous abortions. So infrasound is not a thing you want to absorb on a daily basis. Let me talk about how you would avoid infrasound. You can't keep it from occurring as long as the turbines are allowed to operate. So the only solution is a safe setback. Now the developers often propose that the turbines could be within, at one point, 800 feet from a house, or 1,200 feet from a house, or even 1,200 feet from a property line. But what we've realized here is that safe setbacks that will prevent any significant amount of damage are about 2.5 miles. With new turbines that are coming into other parts of the state that are much larger, we would estimate that the setbacks would have to be 5 miles. but with setbacks that are measured in miles for the safety of people, will not allow a project to be built because you can't put enough turbines in. So the trade-off here that we've talked about with town boards in 35 towns across the state is, do you want your people to be healthy, or do you want to get a few $1,000s for turbine leases for your farmers? That's the trade-off. So a very good question, or questions, are why are developers coming to upstate New York? We don't have any significant type of a wind source. It's not an unusual wind source here. It's about a Class 3 wind, insufficient to power economically an industrial wind turbine. But one of the other reasons goes back to our good friend Andrew Cuomo. Andrew decided to work on his presidential qualifications a couple of years ago and worked with governors of 18 other Democratic states to create renewable energy standards. And what they were trying to do was to see if perhaps by 2050 we could get 15 or 20% of our energy from renewable sources. And Andrew didn't think that was good enough. So what he did is, rather than 15% by 2050, he decided to get 50% by 2030. 11 years from now, 50% of our electricity, according to Andrew, is going to come from renewable sources. A couple of problems with that. Renewable sources are not clean. Solar is not easy to recycle, and wind has serious health impacts on the local population. So where did this standard come from? It has no scientific basis whatsoever. It was simply Andrew wanting to show that he was bigger than everybody else, and he was going to lead the way. Now, if you wanted to build industrial turbines in New York so that the energy generated could be used, you would have to build those turbines downstate. You would get them as close to New York City as possible, because that is where the demand is. Our demand actually in upstate has been declining as industry has left us. We use significantly less electricity here in upstate than we did 25 years ago. So how did it come that people were now going to site industrial wind turbines in places like Wyoming County or Yates County or Ontario County or Orleans County or over in Somerset, Niagara County? Why are they doing this up here? The answer is that after Andrew came out with his 50 by 30 standard, the Public Service Commission a few months later issued some guidelines. And these are the guidelines that said where we were going to site all of these new renewables. And the guidelines said that 20% of the new renewables will be from solar, and we'll site solar downstate. But the 80% of the new energy that's going to be wind turbines, they will all be in upstate. That's the reason that they're coming here. And with what we know about infrasound and the health issues, we are going to have a plague extended across upstate New York. The number of turbines that would be required in order to generate the electricity that, by the way, can't go anyplace because there's no transmission capacity left, would be somewhere between 40 and 60,000 industrial turbines. That's 2 or 3 times as many turbines as Germany has installed. They have about 18,000. They're not putting any more in because it killed the tourist industry in Bavaria. Now, we also had some other interactions with Andrew Cuomo back years earlier when there were plans and proposals for wind developments in 3 towns locally. And we couldn't get anybody to help us. We didn't have any kind of money that we could sue them and try to stop them. We're a poor town. We have 1,250 people here, and the average household income is about $34,000. So we reached out to everybody we could. We tried to work with politicians. They gave us nothing back. Politicians across the state, they did nothing for us. So one day we decided that we would skip around the politicians, go directly to the Office of the Attorney General. And at that time, Andrew Cuomo was the Attorney General for New York State. But we didn't think we'd do too well going through Albany. So we found out that the Public Integrity Bureau of the Attorney General's office was located down in New York City. And in May of that year, which was probably around 2000, I contacted the head of that bureau and spent maybe an hour or 2 on the phone with her and then followed up and sent her additional information. And I did that over the course of that summer. And by September, I began getting calls from actual assistant attorneys general. One was in New York City and one was in Syracuse, New York. And they began to ask questions, and we as a group around Finger Lakes Preservation Association, we respond to their questions and send them data and information. By October of that year, they decided that they wanted to come on site and see what things actually looked like and meet with people. So that November, two attorneys, assistant attorneys general and a state investigator came to our property and spent the day listening to people from the town of Cohocton where the one project was being built. They learned enough about the corruption and criminal acts, including bribes, bribes going to members of the town board and members of the planning committee. They interviewed the individual that was an eyewitness to the bribes being discussed and given. And then they went on to look at the other types of criminal impacts, including antitrust violations. They do what's called market allocation, which means they decide, when they come to their national community meetings, they decide which developer is going to get which town, or who's going to get the east side of Italy and who's going to get the west side. That's a violation of the Antitrust Act. Then they also do price fixing. In other words, they decide as a group what we will give to the people who we are leasing the land from and give them no chance to have any competition because we've done market allocation. The third violation of antitrust has to do with the fact that they have created a coalition, a worldwide coalition of large private companies that are sharing all of this information, and they are the force and the money behind all of these LLCs that are coming down through the state. Now, as many of the towns in upstate were able to win against industrial wind development, and some actually did this even before they had won, they basically began to rewrite their zoning laws in order to prevent industrial development that was inconsistent with the wishes of the people of their town. That's all legal under municipal law. That's what we do here. We write comprehensive plans. The comprehensive plans rely on surveys of the people in the town. We ask them, tell us about the good things of the town. Tell us about the bad things in the town. Tell us about what you want as the future for this town. And in our town, 88% of the people said they did not want to see industrial and commercial development. Specifically, they did not want to see 500-foot wind towers. So what we did in our town was we did not prohibit wind towers. What we did was we simply put together a set of legislation that prevents industrial development unless it has been totally reviewed against the conditions of our comprehensive plan. So we're not against industrial development or commercial development, but we are against commercial or industrial development that would violate the wishes of the people of the town. So to date, we were able to keep people out of the town if in fact they would be in violation of the comprehensive plan. However, 2 years ago, the state legislature passed a little tiny piece of legislation. It's called Article 10. What Article 10 did was basically allow a state siting board, the siting board members were state officials or employees, that they would have the right to oversee the siting of electrical generating facilities across the state of New York. And the stated intent of that was to site electrical generation close to where the demand is. They've done just the opposite now because of political interests. In order to support industrial wind and industrial solar, they are now using Article 10 to come into towns that are 250 and 300 miles away from New York City and put up wind turbines that will generate electricity, but they will not be able to move the electricity anymore because we have no additional transmission capacity. So that's what you're getting from Andrew Cuomo and the state of New York. You're getting a process, a system that is basically evil. They are having people spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars putting up structures that will have no benefit and will in fact help to reduce the health and wellness of millions of people in upstate New York. That's what you get from Andrew Cuomo.